Hey, yo, what's good, everyone? Twisted here with Open Sorcery, and today I want to go ahead and talk about the topic, the belief system or the philosophy of Gnosticism. Now, when it comes to this particular subject, this is actually a video topic I have been putting on the back burner for a while just because, I'll cover it at some point, but I didn't really feel much of an urge to go ahead and get it done straight away. And you know what, truth be told, looking in hindsight, I think it was probably the better sort of decision to go ahead and wait a bit, because, initially, in terms of the series of videos and topics being discussed, it panned out to be discussing gnosis as a concept, a spiritual metaphysical concept, and then Devi, along with her guest and friend Benign Fool, later on going ahead and talking about various sorts of gnosis, that being SPG, VPG, and UPG. Both of those videos, I'll go ahead and have links in the description for you guys to go check that out. And, to delve into those in of themselves. But in terms of, me putting this on the back burner, it's pretty interesting of, how I got you could say, the wake-up call of, alright, get to business, handle your shit, go ahead and actually talk about the damn thing. So, when it comes to various subjects that have been talked about on the channel, a good handful of them have been selected by a manner of bibliomancy, which includes the angelic PR sort of stuff. On the first few videos where I was doing solo monologues, as well as a few others. And earlier on, at least, I can say in terms of making a section in the little Discord chats and channels that, kind of use to organize the subjects, what have you, and then we're going ahead and doing these group discussions or monologues. It happened to be the initial post there, and I don't know whether this manner of bibliomancy took place on that date, but the initial post and channel creation was on February 23rd, 2023, or 2022, I should say. And at the time of this release, only a couple days ago, I did another instance of bibliomancy of alright, what should we go ahead and cover next? Or record next in our agenda? At the time of this recording, it's a couple days prior to that this occurred. It was on February 23rd, 2023. So, in that sort of sense, and this was right after some angelic invocation was done on behalf of both Devi and I, and not necessarily primarily for the purpose of bibliomancy, but for some other things. And yes, it just happened to be a reminder, probably primarily by Uriel. I didn't get a specific confirmation on that or delve into all too much, but knowing that he can be a bit of a sarcastic or snarky dude, hey, you're being lazy, get to the subject. But, or maybe it was a collective sort of thing. But regardless, it just happened to be interesting that, a year to the day of creating that and then doing the bibliomancy, the first result that popped up happened to be talking about Gnosticism. And in both instances of the bibliomancy, I used two different encyclopedias, both written by author Rosemary Allen Gilly, or pronounced as Giley potentially. I always go ahead and do the either or with that name, honestly, because I don't know for sure and I haven't looked to confirm it, but either way, you guys can go ahead and find out. I will be mentioning the specific encyclopedias by name as they are needed throughout the talking of this topic, because I'm actually going to read excerpts from them to discuss Gnosticism and give it a little bit of a definition or explanation in me covering this. So going ahead and actually getting into it, the first one that we're going to look at is an excerpt of what Gnosticism is from Harper's Encyclopedia of Mystical and Paranormal Experience, once again by the aforementioned Rosemary Allen Geely or Guiley. So, by definition in that encyclopedia, it is a dualistic mystical Christian religion which flourished in the Mediterranean region during the 2nd century AD. Gnostic comes from the Greek gnosis, meaning knowledge. Gnostics believed that redemption or liberation of the soul was possible only through knowledge, gnosis, not faith, pistis. At its origin, Gnosticism, the religion of knowledge, or the religion of insight, was a philosophically dualistic religion consisting of at least 60 sects. In Orthodox Christian circles, Gnosticism has been dismissed as heretical and pseudo-religious. However, modern scholarship has questioned this view and considered that the Gnostics may have been the descendants of the original Christians who inherited Christ's esoteric teachings. Gnostic elements can be found in all religions in a broad sense. Gnosticism is the creative element in any religion. Gnostic ideas were widespread before the time of Christ in the Egyptian and Greek mystery cults, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Buddhism, and Taoism. The terms gnosis and sophia, wisdom, appear in the Old Testament, and Paul's first letter to the Corinthians uses gnosis to refer to practical knowledge and sophia to refer to speculative questions. As Gnostic sects developed, sophia came to be associated with the highest wisdom possible, or attainable, which gives insights into the secrets of God. The founding of Gnosticism often is credited to Simon Magus, a reputed miracle worker, who was thrown out of the church and whose rise and fall are recorded in Acts. It is more likely that Gnosticism simply arose under various leaders in the ferment of early Christianity and coexisted for a time with the Orthodox Church. Most Gnostics, in fact, probably would have called themselves Christians, not Gnostics. So yes, once again, from Harper's Encyclopedia of Mystical and Paranormal Experience, that is a general sort of definition for Gnosticism. And when we go ahead and we get into the base conceptual elements of, I guess, what I like to refer as basic bitch Gnosticism, or Gnosticism 101, right? This is going ahead and reciting once again from the encyclopedia. Gnosticism developed a dualism of good, the spiritual, and evil, physical matter. In every person, the divine seed, the soul, spirit, as good, was imprisoned in the body, matter, considered as evil, as a result of a cosmic fall. Furthermore, they taught that spiritual salvation is achieved only by freeing the intrinsically good soul from the intrinsically evil body. Carrying out this dualism to its extreme, radical Gnostics practiced excessive asceticism in their effort to purge themselves of evil. So yes, general, like TLDR, too long didn't read. Spiritual shit good, physical shit bad. And when it comes to the actual, you could say, cosmology of Gnosticism and kind of like the hierarchy, you could say, right? It is based on the Judaic cosmology that preceded it at the time, and added its own elements and twists, so on and so forth. So instead of taking a bottom-up approach, let's go ahead and take a top-down approach. So generally speaking, right, let me go ahead and look at this one graphic right here. So we have the Father of all, that is the highest rung, you could say, or at least highest charted rung on this cosmology image right here. And then we have the Pleroma, which is the light, the fullness, divine light, all that sort of thing. And within the Pleroma are what are considered aeons in of themselves, different divine aspects and very barren concepts within it. And then as we go down in of itself, right, in terms of how the material world was made in of itself, right? Actually, before we get to that, I will use the graphic before kind of like, you could say, delving and detouring off a little bit of that. You have the yellow circle of light and the blue circle of darkness before getting to quote-unquote paradise, where supposedly Adam and Eve were and all that sort of thing, and the archetypal aspects of the zodiac are then put. And this is where I'm going to go ahead and deviate off and go to more so of terms that if you hear about Gnosticism, you're probably going to go ahead and be more so acquainted with, in terms of how the material world came to be. This terrible, awfully horrifying, like, physical existence that the Gnostics went ahead and believed in. And in me saying it like that, like, I can understand the perspective that they're coming from, but at the same time, I see the physical as having purpose, having utility in a grander scheme of things. So I myself am not necessarily going to go ahead and put it in a negative outlook or box. But in terms of, I will say that Gnosticism throughout my journey, throughout my expanding of things, has definitely helped to go ahead and expand the barriers and make it to where I am more so of an open thinker, what have you, and all of that. But I digress. So, as was stated before, you had the Pleroma, you had the Aeons, and one of these particular aeons, I should say, is named Sophia. And if you remember from earlier on, the term Sophia means wisdom. I believe it was in Greek that it came from. And yes, so this particular aeon, Sophia, all the different aeons, at least from my understanding, had partners in pairs for the most part, or at least after a certain generation of them, and these, divine conceptual aspects, what have you. But Sophia was either not with a partner or strayed away from their partner aspect, right? And in doing so, they went ahead and wanted to reproduce. And being that, Sophia was considered as the feminine counterpart, what have you, we have ourselves another instance where the divine feminine is considered as bringing about the evil and the sins of the world, of the material world, of the flesh, and so on and so forth, which mirrors the story of Adam and Eve quite a bit. A higher, as above, macrocosmal reflection of that story, which you could say is more so of in the flesh, or on a lower existential rung, a microcosmal sense. And from this, there was a aberration that occurred because she did not have the proper male divine counterpart, and thus we have the creation of the big villain in this sort of Gnostic tale and vision of things. We have the Demiurge, which comes from the Demiurgos. And alternative names by different sorts of sects are Yaldabaoth, and in many cases is equivalent to the idea of the Jewish and Christian figure of Yahweh, or the primary god of these Judeo-Christian religions, what have you, the patriarch, and so on and so forth, of these different religions and traditions as they exist into the modern day. And under them, you have this demiurge, a created form, created matter, created all these different sorts of, this physical coil, this physical shell that entraps us, that goes ahead and keeps that divine light within us trapped, being that it needed some of it to go ahead. It was created from it and from itself, what was extracted and created of it by Sophia goes ahead and creates us and all that sort of thing. Well, then it went ahead and created archons to go ahead and it's, you could say pseudo aeons or, imperfect aeons, like a falsification, a aberration in the Gnostic perspective, like an imperfect manner of trying to divide itself. And yes, in doing so, there's, just as Yahweh is considered as the demiurge in many cases, archangels and angels are considered as archons in many cases, right? In this particular viewpoint, where the true light is seen as positive, and it is seen as negative in the material sense, or those or beings that govern or watch or have constructed the physical in of itself. So to go back to the chart that I was referencing, which you can go ahead and find in the search engine very easily, and of course, well, actually not of course, because honestly I haven't utilized this all too much, but I may go ahead and utilize it, going ahead and posting on, say, Imgur, or on the Open Sorcery Instagram account, which honestly has not been really utilized up until this point of recording, and go ahead and have that as pictorial reference. But that is honestly up to my own discretion and what I feel up to it. But I digress. So to actually audibly and verbally talk about it. So after paradise, right? Adam and Eve, once again, the microcosmic sort of, reflection of what occurred with Sophia and creating Demiurge, so on and so forth, right? We have the Leviathan, which, from a Kabbalistic standpoint, right, you could kind of equate with the hidden spear of Da'at. And, if you happen to have heard the Leviathan, this is kind of like equating to the primordial waters that were discussed in the beginning of the Bible, like the sea serpent that traverses through it. And there's also references throughout the Bible in of itself to Leviathan. But I shall continue. So now we get into the different, you could say, heavenly realms, or you could say the, and from a Gnostic perspective, still within the physical realm, or what have you, but the planetary archetypes, the planetary spheres, the planetary heavens that relate to the 7 traditional planets, at least in the Jewish and Gnostic cosmogony, the viewpoint of the heavens, space, stars, all that. But let me actually go, and this is from ascending to descending. So we have Saturn, and then below that, Jupiter. So we're going in reverse order in terms of the planets in our solar system, with a couple different alterations. So we have Saturn, then Jupiter, then Mars, then Sun, then Mercury, then Venus, then the Moon, right? And in me having mentioned the Kabbalistic tree of life, this is pretty much from Da'at downward, going ahead and being the spear of Binah, and downward in the lightning bolt pattern until we get down to Yesod, the spirit of the moon. And then after that we have Behemoth, and more so in a modern English sort of pronunciation. And then we finally go ahead and we have Earth in and of itself. And back in those days, we had a geocentric model, a geocentric worldview of everything. So for those nowadays that subscribe to the flat Earth concept and theory and idea, that's where they get it from. It's from the Jewish Gnostic cosmogony, what have you, of stars and planets and all these sorts of things revolving around planet Earth in and of itself as the core gravitational sort of thing, the center point of our universe and existence. Whether you believe in it or not, that is just the perspective in and of itself. But yes, and then even, below Earth, right? You have on the lower half, the lower side of it, Tartarus, using the Greek terminology. But if we're going to go to the Jewish name for the underworld, we have Sheol. And this being the underworld, the place that is farthest away from the light of God, the light of divinity, so on and so forth in this, hierarchy and cosmology of things. Now, since we have covered, that sort of thing, let's go ahead and move on to some of the, various manners of Gnostic sects and or traditions that, have existed or, may even exist in some form today. And, as was stated in the excerpt earlier, there's at least 60, right? But I'm only going to have like a small handful here. I'm not going to cover the whole gamut of those. But two of the more so popular ones happen to be Sethian Gnosticism, which is named after the third child of Adam, Seth, after the story of Cain and Abel, where Cain killed his brother Abel based on the former's jealousy of the latter's accepted sacrifice by the God Yahweh, whereas, his didn't make it up to snuff and all that sort of thing. Wasn't considered kosher. And then we have Valentinian Gnosticism, which is named primarily after the scholar Valentinus. I do not recall at the moment which pronunciation is correct. But, those are the usual two sorts of varieties of Gnosticism that are usually referred to often. And, of course, if you feel so inclined to delve more so independently into the various differences and discrepancies and variations between the two. So, after those two, we have a few more which are a little bit more so unique on their own, right? This one, I would say, is probably the one that perks up my ear a little bit more so, and I've taken a little bit more so interest of delving into, is Mandaism, which is a tradition that is very much tapped into the sacrament of baptism. And it goes ahead and hyper focuses on a select sort of, biblical figures and prophets. Very much, even Adam, the original man, what have you. But that line of succession goes ahead and stops pretty much at St. John the Baptist. Once again, they are very fixed on the sacrament of baptism, and that being many of what their rites and rituals are based around. And there is several hundred Mandaeans who still exist to this day, and it is very much considered as a very much a sin, or very much considered as, I'm trying to think of how to put it, very non-preferential to go ahead and interact with people who are not of that tradition. So they very much are enclosed within themselves quite a bit as the ages have come along. And then we have Manichaeism, which isn't necessarily considered Christian, but kind of like more so like a 3rd century contemporary, which rivaled Christianity and eventually got grouped in with the Gnostic traditions. There is overlaps and all that, but it was considered more so like a rival, at least from a scholarly standpoint, by my understanding. Don't take my word as gospel, though. And then, at least within the Christian view, one that is discussed quite a bit that I've seen and heard and read about a bit is T.O.R. Gnosticism within the period of the Middle Ages. So while a lot of Gnostic traditions are seen as, having occurred, earlier on, say, of course, like, during or after the time, after the time of Christ, and a lot of it happening during the 2nd century, right? And development and speculation that, a lot of these teachings were crafted after the supposed birth time, the lifetime of Christ and his direct descendants or direct followers. That, it's something that happened to go ahead and exist a longer time. It's kind of like a revival of these sorts of things, right? And, outside the realm of Judeo-Christianity and all of that, granted, Abrahamic still, but we have even, ourselves Islamic Gnosticism, which in talking about that, discussing it, I'm not the most familiar with it, and to go ahead and help aid not only I, but, those listening, about learning about this, I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt from the Encyclopedia of Angels, 2nd edition, once again by Rosemary Allen Guiley. And that in of itself was kind of like the first of the two bibliomancy results that actually popped up prior to this recording being done and all of that, as I detailed at the beginning. So, let me go ahead and pull this up and read about Islamic Gnosticism. Similar to the worldview of Christian Gnosticism, one sect of Shia Gnostics, the Ismaili community, explains esoteric human history as a recovery from a catastrophic prehistoric mistake made by an angel, the third intelligence, Adam Ruhani, the celestial spiritual Adam and angel archetype of humanity. Adam Ruhani refuses to respond to the summons of the first intelligence and remains motionless in a state of bedazzlement. He finally recovers only to realize he has been overtaken and has fallen behind himself. It was now the 10th intelligence. This interval of time and stupor he must redeem, corresponding to 7 other intelligences, who are called the 7 cherubim, the 7 divine worlds, and who assist the angel Adam to come to himself. This delay introduces into a being of light an alien dimension that expresses itself in the form of an opaqueness. Each archangelic intelligence in the pleroma contains a pleroma of innumerable forms of light. All the forms who comprise the pleroma of the celestial Adam are immobilized with him in the same delay. He communicates to them the eternal summons. They angrily reject him, and their denial darkens the essential ground of their incandescent being. The angel Adam realizes that if they are to remain in the pure spiritual world, they will never free themselves of their darkness. He makes himself the demiurge of the physical cosmos, the instrument through which the forms who had been of light will find their salvation. Through several cycles of rulership of the 3 dimensions of cosmic space, the first human being arises like a plant growing out of the earth, to be distinguished from both his celestial archetype, the spiritual Adam, third intelligence, who became, hold on one moment, let me just go to the other screenshot, who becomes the 10th, and from the partial Adam, who inaugurates our present cycle. He is described as the integral primordial Adam, Adam al-Awwal al-Kulli, and I can't speak Arabic for none, so my apologies for butchering that pronunciation, who is surrounded by 27 companions, who in physical forms are the faithful humanity of the 10th angel, and whose fidelity is manifested by their physical and spiritual superiority over all other humans of other climes. The first earthly Adam is simultaneously the epiphanic manifest form in the veil of the celestial Adam. He is the founder of the permanent esoteric hierarchy, uninterrupted from cycle to cycle up to and since Islam. After having invested his successor, the first Adam is transferred to the pleroma, where he succeeds the 10th Adam, the 10th angel, the celestial Adam, who rises with the entire hierarchy of intelligences to a level higher. This ascending movement will not cease until the third angel intelligence has regained the spirit of second intelligence. The cycle of epiphany is followed by one of occultation, necessitating the arcane sciences and philosophy, for most of humanity is unworthy of the revelations, which is followed by a new cycle of epiphany, and so on in rotary succession. This will continue until the ultimate resurrection of resurrections, which will be the consummation of our aeon and will restore humanity and its angel to their initial state. So, one takeaway from reading that immediately comes to mind for me happens to be the difference between the third intelligence and the 10th intelligence. And in talking about the Gnostic cosmology previously, right, that was gone ahead and stated, right, this is tying into the Kabbalistic tree of life and that model of things from a mystical standpoint. The third intelligence being that of, Binah, you could say, that sphere, the Saturnian sphere, right? And the 10th sphere on the tree of life being the sphere of Malkuth, the earthly sphere, and this is not counting Da'at as a hidden sphere. But yes, that goes ahead and reminds me of that, as well as the different choirs of angels that exist. 9 choirs of angels, and it is stated in different sources, which I cannot recall at present moment, that humanity in of itself is the 10th, that being from an esoteric and mystical standpoint. But yes, so and gone ahead and pretty much covered that. The last thing I kind of want to go ahead and do is talk about the Gnostic Gospels and Apocrypha, the secret books and all of that sort of thing that you yourself, can read to this day, that existed throughout the ages. And to give a very general and probably not the most accurate recalling recitation of that story, pretty much near the Red Sea, I believe it was in the last century, within the 20th century, 1900s, there was some people in Egypt who happened to go ahead and find a jar within a cave that, within it contained a variety of scrolls, or, several jars with many scrolls that contained these texts that were considered, the Apocrypha, Gnostic sort of Gospels, or, being extracanonical within Judaism or Christianity, or, other assorted different things. And a lot of these are contained within what is considered and called the Nag Hammadi Library, or Nag Hammadi Codexes and all of that. And, to talk about some of them, which are more so popular, or, you can find PDF versions of what has survived from these, right, out on the net to read for yourself. And, of course, there's actual paperback and physical books that contain these within them. But, that it just depends on, what you prefer in terms of the delivery and the sources. And, of course, there's plenty of YouTube videos and plenty of audio discussing these or narrating these for your leisure, of course. But at least from the ones that I've gone ahead and checked out, as time has gone on, some of the standouts or my favorites happen to be the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, not necessarily Mother Mary, but Mary Magdalene, the prostitute that Jesus took favor with and redeemed. That one has quite a few mystical insights within it, that apparently Mary Magdalene was, shared these insights from Jesus Christ, Yeshua ben Yosef, or Isa from the Islamic, titling and translation of the name Yeshua, was shared to her personally, and the disciples and apostles took it as a bit of an offense. It's like, why did you go ahead and get this? Why did you go ahead and learn these teachings? And, it was because, at least in this gospel, Mary Magdalene is considered favored more so. And, if anyone's ever seen the movie The Da Vinci Code, pretty much the idea that Jesus Christ, Yeshua ben Yosef, and Mary Magdalene were an actual romantic couple, and they had a lineage and children, and all of that sort of thing. This isn't something that is necessarily covered just in that movie, or something that derived from this text, but it's in that you can consider it alternative Gnostic sort of perspective, or many different sub-sects and or approaches to Christianity, at least based on the popularity of the mainstream narrative of Catholicism or Protestantism or the Eastern Orthodox, and so on and so forth. But yes, also another one that has quite a few mystical insights, more so in line with Jesus teaching these unto his disciples, and this being more so the core of what he was trying to convey to them throughout the regular Gospels and all of that, is the Gospel of Thomas in and of itself. I definitely encourage you to go ahead and read both of those, so you can go ahead and kind of get an understanding of hey, look, it's not as, these sorts of things aren't as they aren't at, okay, I know how to put it. The acts of Christ, the acts of Jesus are not as, a son of God, and that, only he could do it because he's from on high and we're just some merely lowly humans. No, it's more so hey, come join me. Come join me and access the divine within. And other Gospels, what have you, or Apocrypha and such, which, means secret books and so on and so forth, are the Gospel of Judas, which contains with it conversations between Judas and Jesus that are, more so leaning towards the acts of Judas being planned and orchestrated by Jesus Christ himself, as well as the secret book Apocryphon of John, which, at least the primary sort of thing that I took away from it, is that for the anatomy of a human, that there are many different angelic, quote unquote angelic, intelligences and aspects and beings that correlate to various parts of the body. There happens to be a list that exists in that text. And the reason I went ahead and said quote unquote angelic is because they could be, more so love and light, bro, or high vibrational angels. They could be Enochian angels, which could be that, but also, maybe not necessarily in that realm of things. Fallen angels, and so on and so forth in terms of these particular entities. So I would go ahead and before being too eager to call upon any of them for whatever purposes or experimentation you may have, may want to go ahead and delve into it and check intuitionally, check your gut feeling if you feel like it is something you should do, or you should if it feels right to go ahead and delve into it. And then Thunder Perfect Mind, which is a Gnostic sort of poem that isn't all too long, but it's very good. And I'll just go ahead and name a couple more. The Book of Baruch, the Secret Apocryphon of James, and the Gospel of Nicodemus, or the Acts of Pilate. And as the name says, it's kind of like the perspective of Pontius Pilate as he's about to go ahead and put Jesus Christ to death, or at least go ahead and put him up to the selection of the crowd for them to decide whether Barabbas, the convicted murderer, or Jesus Christ, Yeshua ben Yosef, were to be crucified. And of course, we know how that story goes. But it's more so of looking at it through his particular lens and perspective, and that through his wife. So a little bit more of an expansion on a story that is already present throughout the Gospels. Now, I think with that, that pretty much goes ahead and covers all I wanted to talk about when it comes to the subject of Gnosticism in of itself. And, I'd say that all in all, it's a pretty interesting mystical, metaphysical manner of approaching Christianity, a more so esoteric one, that, I would say, aside from the formalized, or mainstream popular varieties of Christianity, with the exemption of, say, Eastern Orthodox, it takes more so of that intrinsic, looking for a divine within yourself approach, what have you. Whereas you could say Catholicism and Protestantism, at least in how it's, portrayed to the masses, is more so of an exoteric lens, or at least they go ahead and keep it on that surface level, as opposed to promoting more so of an esoteric view of things within Eastern Orthodox. But with all that said, yep, that wraps it up. So this is Twisted with Open Sorcery, and stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.